sounds of victory resounding outside, we hear of a different victory inside. From 1 Corinthians chapter 15, beginning with verse 50. Again, listen for the word of the Lord. What I am saying, brothers and sisters, is this: flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, I will tell you a mystery. We will not all die, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For this perishable body must put on imperishability, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When this perishable body puts on imperishability, and this mortal body puts on immortality, then the saying that is written will be fulfilled: death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, I think we could probably all come up with our own top 10 list of favorite movies of all time. And in that top 10 list, for me, it would have to include the classic movie Harvey with Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart plays Elwood P. Dowd, who used to be oh so smart and successful, but his life changed when he encountered this 6'3" invisible talking rabbit named Harvey. No one else can see Harvey, but Elwood goes around talking with him all the time. Harvey's sister Vita and his nurse Myrtle May are mortified by this behavior. They take him to a psychiatrist, Dr. Chumley. They want him institutionalized. Dr. Chumley confronts Elwood, telling him that he had to deal with reality. And Elwood gently replies, "Well, I've wrestled with reality for 35 years, Doctor, and I'm happy to state I've finally won out over it." Vita and Myrtle May and Chumley keep on trying to get this crazy man to be normal, but in the end they discover that normal is not the cure, normal's the problem. Well, I think that's part of what happens when Paul comes to Corinth. He discovers that they have their version of normal carved in stone all over the place. You see, when the Romans, after they destroyed Corinth, they rebuilt it more beautiful than before, and they filled it with beautiful marble carvings. The Corinthian columns to give them credibility, but more than that, these beautiful statues made by the finest sculptors. Every important emperor and every important god had to have at least one statue. This is a statue of bearded Hermes with a ram on his shoulders. It's a simple sculpture. This is a statue of Zeus, seated on his throne with no shirt on. He looks like he's posing for the cover of a romance novel, doesn't he? There were all sorts of these statues. Every governor, every emperor, when they came to power, they had to have a new statue. The problem was it was expensive to make these kind of statues. It takes a long time to make one, maybe even a year to carve one. So they came up with a solution. They could make the statues and make an ornate body as ornate as they wished, draped with a flowing tunic. But they simply put a hole in the top where the neck was, and there you could place interchangeable heads, so you could have anybody on the statue that you wanted. This is a statue of one with the hand in their tunic, trying to channel their inner Napoleon, probably some governor looking for a sense of dignity. Or this body, whose ornate rising sun breastpiece indicates it was probably the statue of an emperor. So you'd simply take this statue with the hole on top and pop out the old head, slip in a new one, like this statue of a very nervous-looking Julius Caesar. It must have been around the Ides of March that this one was carved. Or a very frisky-looking Nero. He was quite a character, wasn't he? Or this, a very hairy Hercules. Whatever head you wanted, you could mix and match, sort of like G.I. Joe or Mr. Potato Head. All these people at the top with this generic body for the position down below. You can go to Corinth today and you see a whole courtyard filled with headless statues. It's not about Sleepy Hollow. It's about all the different people who were the interchangeable heads at the time. Why all these statues? The statues are symbols of the values that they carried. Symbols to convince people about what matters most, about what's normal, about what's reality. These leaders stood for a set of values carved in stone so the people could see through their eyes what was real. The world would, in essence, stay the same throughout all of these different characters. Just the head at the top changes. Well, isn't that sort of like we experience today? All these leaders who want to convince us that their way of seeing is what's normal, is what's usual, is what's right. We just follow along with whatever system is in place. And if the corporate heads say, well, everything can be reduced to a cost-benefit analysis, then we kind of smile and nod and say, well, that must be the way it is, and we go along with it. The only ethical question then becomes, well, how much is it worth? What will you take for it? Like the mining companies who no longer dig holes in the earth to get at the ore that they're after, they just blast away the whole mountain. So far, do you know there are over 600 fewer mountains in the United States than there used to be? You don't see them, they don't put them alongside the interstate. It's back in the range further. 600 fewer mountains. Why? Well, because some people have done the cost-benefit analysis, and that's the easiest way to get at it. But look through a different set of eyes. How much is a mountain worth? How much is it worth to have a mountain stream disappear forever? How much is it worth to have all the fish in that stream and all the wildlife who fed from that stream disappear? How much is it worth to have a sunset across a mountaintop disappear for all future generations? There are things in the world that we need to see through new eyes. There's other stories too. I think there's all sorts of stories about how we stop seeing what really matters most. There was a story in the New York Times just a few days ago about a couple of tourists killed at the site of Tulum in Mexico. They were caught in the crossfire of some Mexican drug cartels. The cartels have pronounced war on each other, and the Mexican government has pronounced a war on drugs. And it's been going on for the past 20 years, and so far, since then, 300,000 people have been killed. And the killing goes on. The heads at the top change of the government and the cartels, but the killing goes on. Why? Because the world needs new eyes to see. I kind of wonder, maybe rather than giving out long prison sentences, someone convicted of a drug crime needs to be sentenced to plant a flower at each one of the 300,000 graves. We need new eyes to see. We need hope. New eyes to see is what Jesus brings to us. Time after time, the Bible makes clear Jesus has come to cure our blindness and to see anew how we can be involved in the world for transformation, to be on the way with Jesus. God is there to give us a different way of seeing, a different take on reality. Jesus does these dramatic actions like curing a blind man to say, we need a new way of seeing. Paul does these dramatic things like preaching a sermon in the marketplace that gets him arrested. Why? To make a scene, to let it be known, like in a play, there is this indelible moment where people say, oh, I get it. We need to change. The artistic moment that comes with our faith, is there to liberate our imaginations. Paul speaks in Corinthians of the foolishness of the gospel, and sometimes he acts kind of crazy, but he's doing it in the spirit of that crazy Jesus, creating these moments that give people new eyes to see for a new connection to the world. Symbolic actions that help us to recognize that our center of life and our center of salvation is not in our bank account. It's not in our win-loss column. It's not in our balance sheets. It's not in our ideologies. It's not in our institutions, financial, political, or religious. It's not in the stone heads of our arrogant selves. The foolishness of the gospel means there's a different set of values out there, and that God is bringing them to us if we open our eyes to see. Paul says, get ready. Get ready. Things as they are not as they will be. Paul says, I will tell you a mystery. We will not all die, but we will all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. For the perishable body must put on imperishability, a new set of understandings of what matters eternally. We will all be changed. A lot of people try to put Jesus in the category of being just normal, of being just an exceedingly nice guy, but he wasn't an exceedingly nice guy. What he was exceedingly alive and on the way. He did the unexpected, and in the spirit of the unexpected Jesus, Paul says, in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye, we will all be changed. There are so many ways of saying this in the Bible, it fascinates me again and again. You hear that message following this Jesus who does these surprising things, these dramatic things, these even crazy things to open our eyes and help us to become exceedingly alive. In the twinkling of an eye, Paul says, we will all be changed. Samuel Wells, an ethicist, says in his book Improvisation, a story. He gives a story about a young woman, Robin, not this Robin, okay, about a young woman, Robin, who is doing an internship from seminary. She has been assigned the job of calling on the homebound. And there was a man that none of the deacons wanted to call on, Harry. So they assigned Robin to call on Harry. He was a big person, sitting in an overstuffed chair, and he really could barely get out of it. It was difficult for him even to breathe, and it appeared easily, you would see when you went into his house, this guy's a hoarder. There were piles and piles of old clothes and rags, and it was not a particularly pleasant place to visit, nor was he a particularly pleasant person. But Robin, the intern, went back a second time, and then a third and a fourth. And then after that time, Harry began to open up to her. One visit, Harry said to Robin, "It's time for you to have a look in the cellar." Now, that's not something that a young woman necessarily wants to hear from a strange man. But reluctantly, she had trust with him, so she walked to the cellar door, and she carefully opened it and looked into the darkness, and Harry insisted from his chair, "Go on downstairs." And she turned on the light and went down, and to her astonishment, she saw this huge weaver's loom. It was set up, and it still had a rug that was still being woven on it. Robin's head was spinning. trying to put her expectations about the man upstairs that she'd come to judge and see from one perspective in relationship to this work of beauty that she was seeing downstairs that he obviously was creating. She came back upstairs, and Harry instructed her to go into the kitchen and bring him a pile of rugs that he had there on the shelf, rugs that he had woven on the loom. He took them from her, and he began to tell her the story of his life, how he collected any old clothes that nobody wanted. He tore them into strips, and he tied them together, and he took them to his loom and wove them into something new. Then he would take these rugs he had created and give them to people in need. He went on to say that he did this because he felt like he was that pile of worn-out clothes. He was alienated from family and friends, unable to work, unable to get out, unable to even breathe on his own. He felt like he was on the rubbish pile of life. But when he took this trash and turned it into treasure, when he made something beautiful and useful and new, it reminded him of what God was doing for him. Then Harry gave Robin his finest rug. Well, it was just a few weeks later that Robin conducted Harry's funeral. But the story isn't over there. Robin went back to seminary and shared Harry's story with a group of her classmates. Afterwards, one of the classmates came up to Robin and said, "Harry was my uncle." The woman was in tears because she realized that she had lost her chance to reconcile with him. The next day, Robin found this young woman and reached out her hand and gave her Harry's finest rug. Who knew that Harry, foolishly taking those rags and tearing them up and weaving them together and turning trash into treasure down in that smelly basement, who knew that this treasure would finally find its way across all those miles and heal his own niece? You can't put a cost-benefit analysis on something like that, but evidently God can inspire it. Harry had been healed, and then Harry went on from beyond the grave to heal the blindness of his own niece. You see, the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. The weakness of God is stronger than human strength. So the question is, where is it that God is seeking to cure your blindness, my blindness, our blindness? Where is God seeking to make us new? You see, these changes can happen. It can happen in a moment of grace. It can happen in the twinkling of an eye.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click to donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.